Hi, hello, it's me, Jamie, also Unkempt Snugglepepper. I'm back with another Reddit art critique. And before I get into it, I want to specify that this video is meant to be educational. I want to provide a critique to other artists to help them improve, and also as my viewers, seeing other people's art critiques is a great way to learn, hey, I also do that in my art. This is how I can improve. In addition, providing an art critique also helps me as an artist better understand different parts of art. What this video is not is an attack on the artist or an attack on their art or trying to fix their art, saying that there is a right way and a wrong way to do art. A lot of things can be subjective. I will say that most of the wrong answers in art are like eating paint. You probably shouldn't eat paint. So, with that said, let's get into it. So this artist had 3 pieces, and they want a more clean style and a more pop to their art. The first thing I would say when taking pictures of traditional art, one of the hardest parts is getting a good light. The first thing that I'm going to do is come over here to tonal correction and do brightness and contrast. I'm going to increase the brightness to get the white of our paper a little whiter. And so the pencil doesn't disappear too much, I'm going to increase the contrast, and that's going to bring back the darker darks of the pencil. There's a lot of things that I really like. I like the overall shape language, how the eye is, the sharpness of the nose, the way the lip wraps around, but this is where it becomes kind of tricky because on one hand, you are using line art to define the face, which is a stylistic choice. The problem becomes, I think you're beginning to be a little too dependent on the lines to define the form. And you know that things should be shaded. You know that light is touching and that things are in shadow and some things should be darker than others. However, you're not exactly sure where to place the shadow. Overall, let's start with some big areas. So if we have our light source and it's coming down on her, she is looking perhaps up towards the sun, then our shadow is going to be in a few places. We're going to have the overall shadow of the face coming over here, coming over on the cheek, going into the chin. And we're going to have the shadow of the hair. And you are correct that her neck would be in shadow because we have the shadow of the face. So we have the form shadow, the shadow that shows us that the face is turning away from the light. We also have a cast shadow, meaning that the jawline is blocking the light from the chin. So this is actually going to be a little bit darker. Now, with this shadow, yes, it's a little bit messy. This medium shadow, we're also going to get it more in the eye. It's going to be more up here. This is the socket inside the skull, and the eye is a ball that sits inside that socket. So it has one of the darker shadows in the face. The bottom of the nose will also have a shadow. Our top lip is going to be darker than our bottom lip because if our light is coming from above, it catches less shadow. So I would agree, this is kind of a medium shadow. And then your highlight is going to hit on the lip. When working on a portrait this small, I wouldn't worry about the lines in the lip. It's actually going to make the lips look dry and wrinkly rather than conveying more detail. The nose, there is a saturation change as you go from the cheeks into the nose. However, the nose is sitting the furthest forward, so it's actually going to have a highlight going on the bridge rather than a shadow. This shadow would be along the side, and then this highlight would be repeated on the nostril. And then you are correct, there would be a shadow from the nose going to the lip. On her eye, there's going to be a little bit of shadow as the eye recedes backwards. Since the eyeball is a sphere, this comes back into highlight. So part of making something look clean and making it really pop is that these shadow shapes need to be more certain. How do we know what those shadow shapes look like? How do we know what they're supposed to do in any circumstance? So I would recommend a few things in your studies. Number one, I would look at references. And the right references to look at are going to have a single light source, and that light source is going to be a stronger light source, which is what creates those dynamic highlights and shadows. One of the examples that I really like to use is the cover for Phantom of the Opera from like the 2005 movie. Because there's such a strong light source and it's coming from a direction, we get highlights that are very defined and shadows that are very defined. What happens when we look at pictures of celebrities is they tend to have multiple light sources, which removes a lot of these core shadows, which are what define the form when we're looking at something. My next recommendation in learning more is to take those references and see if you can break them down into 2 or 3 different shades. So I would pick a middle shade, the darkest shade, and a highlight. There we go. Breaking the face down into these shades really makes you think about how can I make a smaller shape within a shape in order to better define some of the form. This is where it becomes hard. Line work, in a way, holds you back a bit because rather than using value to define the form, you're having to use lines to define the form. And I think in some ways that may be holding you back. So it's hard because I think absolutely you should practice drawing in a more cartoon style, not necessarily realistic style. I think that's wonderful. I think there's a balance between drawing in a style and drawing from life and studying from life. Another thing I would say with the hair and why I would say line is kind of holding you back a bit, we can better define the hair by making a highlight and then this move down rather than using lines. You are correct that we should look at the hair as being a large form overall, but we also then want to break the hair down into smaller strands. Much like we see a forest, and then we see trees, and then we see branches, and then we see leaves, hair kind of follows a similar pattern. That we see the overall shape, the haircut, the style, and then we see the sections of the hair, so the bangs compared to what comes on the top, the sides, the back, and then we break those down into smaller locks, and eventually we have the individual hairs, which we use very sparingly, so we'll have like a single hair that moves outward. This is more of a painterly style. If I were doing more of a graphic style, what I would do instead is break the hair down into 3 different shades, much like I did over here. I can use less blending and utilize those shapes in order to define where the hair is. So now, this is just demonstration. I know that this doesn't make things look really clean or smooth or up to the next level. But what we did is we increased the brightness and the contrast. That's going to help a lot with giving it a pop, giving it a more clean look. And then we talked about where those highlights should be, where the shadows should be, and the use of line. So let's look at some other ones. So here we have a portrait which is it looks like you're going kind of in between about 3/4 and straight on. Let's talk about applying that idea of using a shadow, a highlight, and a mid-tone. So once again, I'm going to go in here and do a tonal correction. I'm going to bring up the brightness. That removes some of the darkness, so we're going to go in with the contrast to kind of bring some of that pencil back. Now, the other thing I did is remove the saturation. So there was a lot of warmth. I assume you're using house lights, which generally tend to look yellow. That's why when we take pictures, a lot of times things appear more yellow in our picture than how we're seeing it. This is going to be our highlight. We're going to have a mid-tone, and we're going to have our darkest tone. Okay, so we have this eye and we want it to be expressive. And I think what's happening is we're relying too much on using lines. So we have a line here and we have a line here. And then this uses lines rather than shading and making a shadow shape. So if I were to draw this eye, trying to give kind of that sad appearance, because I'm going to guess that this and this is kind of a worried, sad look. So what I'm going to do is come over here, give myself like a little blank canvas. So if I want to do an expressive eye, rather than using line, I'm going to use my shadow shapes. I'm going to put in my brow bone. And the shadow follows down to the nose. There's my eyelid. And then my eyebrow moves up here. There's this shadow that is the eye socket, and that's going to fall into the crease that happens. But there's a bit of a shadow right here, and then a lesser shadow right in there as the nose starts to come down. So right in here would be the nose, and then it moves into the cheek, which is going to be lighter. And I'm going to be working in big areas, starting with the overall shadows. Right, so I'm using value and the change in value and the smaller shapes in order to give the eyebrow that expression. What we're viewing as a line is actually a change in altitude in the skin. So as we create that expression and our skin wrinkles, some of the skin is pushed upward. It's displaced from where it was, and that creates the highlight. And then some of the skin wrinkles closer to the muscle or to the bone, and that's creating the shadow. So I'm not thinking about the creases as being a single brush stroke, but rather the change from a higher point to a lower point. Now, I do want to address that I am painting digitally, and I understand that's different from pencil. You can lay down a layer of graphite or charcoal and erase it with a kneaded eraser to bring in the highlights, or use white colored pencil or a white charcoal pencil to bring in the highlights. The process of thinking of shadows and highlights and the process of thinking of parts of the expression as being in shadow and highlight still apply when using pencil. The biggest difference is with pencil, generally you're working from a white background to your darkest shadow, which is going to be your softest leaded pencil. Pencil does come with a bit of nuance, and I think I may have some solutions to help your art look a little bit more clean, especially with pencil, and I will get into those in the next clip. Okay. It's kind of weird to talk about pencil as a digital artist. Although I do have a physical sketchbook, I do use pencil. But let's talk about a few things specific to the medium. Number one, I'm going to suggest working a little bit larger. Pencil kind of has a weird caveat that if you work really, really, really big, a pencil is only so large and it's kind of hard to cover a large space when you only have a pencil. One benefit of working larger is that we're going to be able to get into smaller details. For example, here where her eyelid is, working on a larger canvas will allow us to get into that smaller space and go in with more details. When working larger, it also gives us an opportunity that our pencil marks overall are going to be much smaller in comparison to the whole piece. Now, with pencil, another benefit is that you have multiple pencils. You have H, which is a harder lead. The higher the number, the harder the lead, the lighter the mark. You have B's, which are softer lead. The higher the number, the softer the lead, the darker the mark. Based on your drawings, I'm curious if you're using like a full range of pencil. I start out my drawings with a 4H. That allows me a light enough mark that I can sketch. And in that sketch, this is the time and place that I allow myself to be extra messy. I don't mind doing little chicken scratch marks. So in this instance, once I have the sketch in place, I would go in and start adding all the places that I want the shadow to be. Some places I know I'm going to use a darker shadow. And once I have that first pass, I'm going to start moving into progressively darker pencils. So usually I'll jump to around an HB and start adding in some more shading. And don't be afraid to jump back and forth with the pencils. So if you find an area that could be a little darker, go from there. The next order of business is blending. So like here in our background, we can use a blending stump in order to blend that out. We can also use an old t-shirt. Now with using our finger or using the hand, we have oil in our hand and that kind of acts like a fixative for graphite. We may be able to blend on the first pass, but after that, the oil in our skin is going to build up and the piece will no longer accept any more graphite or any more charcoal on top of it. The next question is, okay, Jamie, cool. I'm using different pencils. I'm putting different lead down. However, I'm getting these little smudges all over my piece. A lot of artists will use a blank piece of paper in order to prevent their hand from smudging their work. In addition, when you are finished with your piece, you may want to spray a fixative on it to keep the graphite from moving. As you progress through your piece, as you're getting darker, you should be moving more towards a 2B and then a 4B and a 6B, and that's going to give you those really darks that are going to help things pop. I really feel that overall you have incorporated a lot of stylistic elements that I've seen in art that circulates the internet, and that's not a bad thing. I see in your art that you have more of an energetic pencil work, and I am also a very energetic person when it comes to my lines and shading and filling things in. I'm a very messy artist. I have decided personally to embrace that I'm a little messier and that I'm going to go over things a few times to get the desired outcome. I have found that embracing my messiness, my sketchiness, was much easier than trying to go in and make perfect lines and have beautiful, intricate line art. That's not my style. And that's okay. Well, we made it to the end. I forgot how much my critique videos are to edit. Mostly because I say and I will go over something a few times while filming and then have to piece it together like it makes sense. So, if you found this video helpful, If you're the artist, if you're a viewer, please leave a like or a comment down below. Consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. I plan on doing more art critiques in the future, as well as various videos talking about a variety of topics in art. And of course, I hope you continue drawing, painting, and making art. Have a good one.